The man who walked in like Nobadiah's sun had just begun its slow rise over San Francisco, casting a golden hue across the skyline. Soft beams of light slipped through tall glass buildings, waking the city gently, like a whisper brushing against sleepy eyes. Across the downtown street, a large banner fluttered in the morning breeze. It read, "Annual Global Innovation Summit Keynote Speaker, Sundar Pichai." Crowds were gathering already, some with press badges, others with smartphones held high, hoping to snap a glimpse of something or someone remarkable, but a quiet figure stood alone by the curb, unnoticed. He wore a plain blue shirt, the kind you'd find in any store. Backpack hung from one shoulder, worn at the edges, and his shoes were dusty from travel. His hair was neat, his face calm, but there was something humble, almost invisible about him. The man checked his watch and looked toward the Grand Convention Center gates. That man was Sundar Pichai, not the version people saw on magazine covers, not the one behind glowing screens or stage lights. This was the Sundar who liked early mornings and long walks. The one who remembered growing up in a modest home in Chennai, where phones were rare and internet was a distant dream. The one who still smiled at strangers and never thought of himself as important. But today, that humility was about to become a problem. As Sundar stepped forward, a large hand touched his chest and stopped him. It belonged to a tall security guard. In a black uniform, with mirrored sunglasses, his name tag read Jackson. He didn't smile. "Hold it right there," Jackson said, voice firm. "You can't go in from here. VIP access only." Dar blinked, surprised, and offered a kind smile. "I understand. I'm Sundar. I'm actually the keynote speaker." Jackson's face didn't move. No recognition, no reaction. He tapped the clipboard in his hand, flipping through a list. "You don't have a badge? No badge, no entry? That's protocol." Sundar nodded slowly. "It's okay. I think the organizers might have it inside. I just arrived early. I didn't want to make a fuss. Then you need to go around to the attendee entrance like everyone else." Jackson replied, pointing toward a long line of guests wrapped around the block. "You'll have to wait." For a second, Sundar looked at the line, then back at Jackson. He could have insisted, could have pulled out his phone, called someone, said a single name that would change the tone of the whole conversation.
But he
didn't. Instead, he smiled again softly this time, like someone who had been through worse, and said, "All right." He turned and walked toward the line. And that's where it began, the story that no one saw coming. Asterisk, asterisk, the line moved slowly. Around Sundar were people chatting, sipping coffee, holding bright-colored lanyards. Some were tech founders, some students, others journalists, preparing their notebooks. None of them noticed the quiet man behind them. No one recognized him. Sundar didn't mind. He observed the details, the anxious tapping of a foot, the nervous rehearsing of elevator pitches, the way people looked toward the building like it was a castle they hoped to be let into. He had been there once, not here in San Francisco, but years ago, standing in line for an interview in the burning heat of a Chennai afternoon, unsure if he'd be good enough. As the line crept forward, a girl ahead of him dropped her phone. It clattered to the sidewalk and cracked. "Oh no," she gasped. Without hesitation, Sundar knelt down, picked it up gently, and handed it back to her. "Careful," he said with a warm smile. "Phones break hearts faster than people do." She laughed. "A bit embarrassed. Thank you. I didn't even notice you were behind me." He nodded. "Most people don't." As they spoke, Sundar noticed Jackson pacing nearby, glancing over at the line from time to time. The guard looked irritated, almost on edge. Sundar watched him carefully, sensing something strange. The kind of strange that sits in your stomach. Before your mind catches up, asterisk, asterisk, when Sundar finally reached the registration table, a young volunteer looked up at him. "Badge, please?" she asked cheerfully. "I don't have one." "I'm Sundar Pichai. I think it's inside." Her smile faltered. "Just for a second." She typed quickly, then looked up again, more serious now. "I'm sorry. There's no record under that name." Sundar frowned slightly. "Could you check again? Maybe under keynote speaker?" She shook her head. "I really don't see anything. Do Do you have an email confirmation? He reached into his backpack, but before he could find it, Jackson appeared. Beside him, expression now darker. I told you. No badge, no entry. Sir, I believe he's telling the truth, the girl said, unsure now. Jackson shook his head. Doesn't matter. I know when someone's trying to sneak in. Sundar looked at Jackson closely. Why would I sneak into my own event? Jackson leaned in slightly. If you're really Sundar Pichai, where's your security? Your assistant? Your team? There was no answer to that. Just silence. Sundar didn't raise his voice. He didn't protest. But his eyes, usually calm and gentle, held something new now. Not anger. Something deeper. A kind of sorrow that comes only when someone doubts not your name, but your worth. He stepped aside and sat down on a low wall near the fountain. Birds flitted past. He checked his phone, tried calling his assistant, but there was no answer. Of all days, the signal seemed weak here. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Inside, the event was beginning. On stage, a large screen flashed Sundar's name. Lights swept the audience. The host cleared his throat and smiled into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the man who needs no introduction, Sundar Pichai. There was thunderous applause, but Sundar was still outside, sitting quietly by the fountain. And Jackson. He stood nearby, arms crossed, still watching him, and with a small frown on his face, asterisk, and then came the twist. A woman in a gray suit walked past the entrance, juggling coffee and folders. She spotted Sundar out of the corner of her eye. Froze. Oh my God, she gasped. That's Sundar Pichai. Jackson turned. What? She ran up to him. You've been sitting here this whole time? They're waiting for you inside? The whole summit is delayed? Jackson's jaw dropped. He looked at Sundar like he was seeing him for the first time. Wait, ... You really are, it's okay, Sundar said gently, standing up. You were just doing your job. But Jackson's voice cracked. Sir, ... I'm so sorry. I didn't recognize you. I thought. Sundar smiled. You thought I was nobody? That's all right? People have thought worse? Jackson blinked, stunned. But you could have. You could have said something, shown me something. I miss all of this. Sundar said, eyes twinkling. Sometimes the best stories happen when people don't know who you are. And with that, he walked past the gates, leaving Jackson speechless behind him. Asterisk, but inside the hall, things were already shifting. Rumors had spread. Staff were whispering. The keynote was delayed. Questions were being asked. And someone else was waiting in the wings, someone who had no intention of letting Sundar take the stage. And Sundar finally stepped into the light, would find that not everyone was ready to welcome him, because respect is not always given, even to those who've earned it. Shadows in the spotlight. Sundar stepped through the side doors of the convention hall just as the event coordinator was nearly on the verge of panic. She rushed toward him, holding a clipboard like a sword and a headset mic tangled around her neck like a vine of stress. Her voice came out too fast, words tripping over themselves. Where have you been? We've delayed the keynote by 30 minutes. The audience is restless. The press is buzzing. Your name was trending on social media with the hashtag #Misincio. 5 minutes ago. He didn't panic. He didn't even flinch. Sundar simply gave a small smile, the kind that says, I've seen worse storms than this. Then he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and said, Breathe. I'm here now. It'll be okay. Behind the curtain, the stage lights flashed in blues and golds, waiting like a patient orchestra. The auditorium was filled rows upon rows of people, from tech elites in tailored suits to students with plastic name tags and crumpled notebooks. All of them had come for one voice. And yet, that voice had almost been locked outside by a man who thought he wasn't important enough to matter. But Sundar wasn't thinking about that anymore. He was thinking about what he had seen in the line, nervous kids, hopeful eyes, shoes worn thin by dreams, people who had stories in their pockets and only one chance to tell them. He wasn't here just to speak. He was here to remind the world. Why voices like theirs mattered then, just as he was about to take the stage. A figure stepped into the hallway. He was tall, dressed in sleek black, and wore the kind of grin that didn't reach the eyes. His name was Rishi Menon. Years ago, Sundar had interviewed him at Google. He didn't get the job. Sundar remembered that clearly, not because Rishi had failed, but because he had taken the rejection as a personal betrayal. "Look who finally made it," Rishi said, voice like silk dipped in vinegar. "You nearly missed your moment." "I didn't miss it," Sundar replied softly. "Just took the long way around." Rishi nodded slowly, leaning against the wall. There were some ... interesting talks this morning. Some people were saying you might not even show. Few started wondering if someone else should step in." Sundar raised an eyebrow. "Someone like you?" Rishi smiled. "It's only if needed, of course. Can't have a crowd waiting with no one to inspire them." There was a long pause. Not hostile, not loud, just heavy. Two men with history standing in the silence. Of what could have been? Of what almost was? Sundar didn't speak, but the weight of his gaze said enough. Rishi chuckled under his breath and walked away. Backstage, the lights dimmed. The music changed. It was time. Asterisk, asterisk, when Sundar stepped onto the stage. The audience burst into applause, not because they recognized the weight of his footsteps, but because they had been told to expect greatness. What they didn't expect was how quietly that greatness would enter the room. He walked to the center, looked out over the sea of faces, and said nothing for a moment. Then he began, not with his resume, not with the glory of achievements or charts of future profits. He started with a story. "A few hours ago," Sundar said, "I couldn't get into this event. I was stopped at the door, told I didn't belong, told to wait in line. And honestly, ... I didn't argue, because it reminded me of something important, something that's easy to forget when you spend enough time in boardrooms and behind microphones." The audience leaned in. People don't always see who you are. They see your clothes, your title, your badge, or the lack of it. They make decisions in seconds. And sometimes they're wrong. You could hear a pin drop. "But here's the thing," he continued, "what really matters is not what others see. It's what you carry with you, your values, your story. The kindness you show when no one is looking, the humility to stand in a line you don't need to be in, the patience to wait for respect without demanding it." His voice was steady, never rushed, but every word seemed to land harder than the last. Somewhere in the back, Jackson the security guard stood near a monitor, listening with wide eyes and a sinking heart. Asterisk, asterisk, as Sundar spoke, faces in the audience began to shift. Not with boredom, not with awe, but with something quieter, recognition. Like they were seeing pieces of themselves in this quiet man on stage. He didn't sell them a vision of the future. He showed them the mirror of the present. The boy with startup dreams. The woman with a patent no one believed in. The single father coding at night while raising two kids.
A's.
All of them, suddenly, were not just listening to Sundar, they were with him. But in a dark corner of the control booth, Rishi was watching too, and he wasn't smiling anymore. Asterisk, asterisk, after the keynote, the applause came like a wave, not just claps. Standing ovation. ... Sundar didn't linger in the light. He stepped off stage quietly, like a man who had simply done what he came to do, backstage. Jackson approached him, hat in his hands, eyes down. "Sir, ... double quotes," he started. "You don't need to apologize," Sundar interrupted. "You did your job." "Reminded me of mine." Jackson looked up, eyes glassy. "I didn't know who you were." "Most people don't," Sundar said, "until you show them." Just then, Rishi appeared again, this time with a camera crew, smiling wide. "Great speech," he said loudly. "So inspiring. Mind if we grab a quick interview together?" Sundar looked at the crew, then at Rishi. Something in his eyes shifted. "Actually," he said, turning to Jackson, "I think I'd rather talk with someone who kept me out of the building than someone who tried to take the stage from me." Rishi's smile cracked. The cameras paused. Jackson's mouth opened slightly. You mean me? You did something important today?" Sundar said. "You reminded me what humility looks like when it's tested. Come with me." And just like that, the story took another turn. The man who was once invisible became a symbol, not because he was perfect, but because he was real. Asterisk, asterisk. But far from the cheers, as far from the stage, a laptop blinked to life in a hotel room. A video had been uploaded anonymously. A short clip, grainy, taken outside the convention center that morning. It showed Sundar being denied entry. It showed Jackson, firm and frustrated. And it showed Sundar saying quietly, "You thought I was nobody." The video was titled, "Is This How We Treat Leaders Who Stay Humble?" Within minutes, it went viral, and with it came consequences. Sundar had won the crowd. Someone somewhere was about to twist the story. The danger of being seen sun had set behind the city skyline, melting into shades of orange and bruised purple. But the glow of screens hadn't dimmed. Across the internet, a storm was growing. What had started as a curious clip of a tech giant being denied entry to his own event had transformed into a wildfire of opinions, edits, duets, think pieces, and outrage. Sundar Pichai mistaken for a nobody. How power humbles itself, then goes viral. CEO gets blocked by his own security guard, and his response is pure class. But not all the voices were kind. Not all the narratives were fair. Some twisted the footage, slowed it down, added dramatic music. Others cropped it to make it seem like Sundar had been publicly humiliated, mocked, or worse, intentionally disrespected by a system that didn't care who he was. And in the far corners of the web, where cynicism always finds oxygen, people whispered, was it staged? Some even asked, is Sundar losing control of the company? If people don't recognize him anymore, maybe it's time he stepped down. And just like that, a quiet moment of humility became a magnet for chaos. But Sundar. He was sitting in a diner. Yes, a diner. One of those old chrome-edged ones with sticky menus and fluorescent lights that buzz a little too loud. His tie was loosened, his jacket folded beside him. A half-eaten sandwich sat untouched on his plate, because he'd stopped being hungry the moment he saw his face trending next to headlines. He didn't. Right across from him sat Jackson, the guard, the man who unknowingly sparked it all. He was still wearing his uniform, though he looked smaller in it, now like a kid trying on his father's coat. He'd been quiet since they got there, only breaking the silence once to ask, "Are you sure you want to be seen with me right now?" Sundar had nodded, especially now. The waitress poured more coffee into their mugs, glancing at Sundar, with suspicion, not because she recognized him, but because she didn't. Jackson finally spoke. "I didn't mean to cause all this." "You didn't," Sundar replied gently. "The internet did. It always does. But people think I disrespected you." Sundar looked out the window. "People think a lot of things. The only truth that matters is the one you carry when no one's watching." Jackson nodded slowly, though his hands still fidgeted with the edge of his napkin. "You really believe that?" "I have to," Sundar said. "It's either that, or let strangers decide who I am." Asterisk, meanwhile, not far from that humble diner, Rishi Menon sat in a sleek office overlooking the bay. He sipped from a crystal glass of water, his laptop open before him. He had been watching the video's analytics grow. Millions of views, trending hashtags, polarizing opinions. He hadn't posted the clip, but he knew who had. One of his interns had caught it, filmed it quietly when Rishi asked them to keep an eye on anything unusual. And Rishi hadn't stopped them, not exactly. He'd just said, "Make sure the world knows what happened out there." And now, the world knew. But they didn't know everything. Not yet. Harisha leaned back, folded his hands, and whispered to himself, "Let's see how the golden boy handles pressure." He had been waiting for this moment, not out of malice, but out of hunger. For a seat at the table that had always felt just 1 inch too far. For a chance to finally outshine the man who had once politely, quietly turned him down for a job. Revenge. Didn't have to be loud. Sometimes it just needed a headline. Asterisk, asterisk, the next morning. Dar woke up to a meeting request from the board. Urgent, private, in person. When he arrived, the air in the room was stiff. 11 faces around a polished table, none of them smiling. Even the coffee smelled disappointed. The chairwoman spoke first. "Sundar, thank you for coming. We want to talk about the incident, the one outside the event." Another board member jumped in. It's gone global. It's becoming more than a meme. It's a conversation. About what? About identity, someone said. About leadership. About whether the company is too removed or too soft. Sundar sat back, listening, really listening. Because this wasn't just about the clip, it was about perception. And perception, when it snowballs, starts to feel like truth. They talked for 45 minutes. No one raised voices, no one pointed fingers. But the message was clear. Fix this fast, or risk becoming the man who lost. Control of his own narrative. Asterisk, asterisk, Sundar left the room in silence. Not defeated, not angry, just thoughtful. He took the elevator down alone. When the doors opened, he found himself in the basement-level lobby, one of those quiet maintenance corridors most executives never pass through. A janitor was mopping the floor, humming to himself. Sundar paused, watching him for a moment. Long day, he asked. The janitor looked up, startled. Me. Oh, yeah. Floors don't clean themselves. Sundar nodded. You been here long? At 23 years? Ever seen the top floor? The janitor laughed. They don't really invite guys like me up there. Sundar smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was true. And that truth was louder than any trending video. Asterisk, asterisk, that night, Sundar sent out a memo to the entire company. Not just the executives, not just the marketing team. Everyone from interns to cafeteria workers to engineers and janitors. In it, he didn't defend himself. He didn't apologize for being mistaken. Instead, he wrote about how easy it is to forget the power of humility. How sometimes being unseen gives us a better view of the world, and at the end, he added one line, respect should never require a badge. Asterisk, asterisk, but just as the story seemed to find its heartbeat again, something new appeared. A second video, this one. Filmed inside the green room before the keynote, it showed Rishi Menon whispering to a staff member, he won't make it. If he doesn't show, I'll step in. Just stall for a few minutes. And in that moment, captured in shaky, barely audible footage, the intent became clear. The delay hadn't been an accident. The mix-up had been exploited, and the man who once waited in line was about to find out that is real. Challenge wasn't the outside world. It was the people who wanted his crown. The cost of quiet power in every life. There comes a moment when silence is no longer noble. When the softest man in the room must choose whether to remain calm or rise. For Sundar Pichai, that moment arrived not with fireworks or scandal, but with a single grainy video. He was sitting alone in his office. Lights dimmed, the city pulsing outside like a heartbeat. The world hadn't stopped spinning, but his world had shifted. The second video had surfaced, and unlike the first, it didn't go viral with cheers. It landed like a slow-building storm, quiet, heavy, undeniable. In the footage, Rishi Menon's. The voice was soft, almost casual. A few words, smirk, a plan hinted at through a whisper. And then silence. But that silence screamed. Sundar watched it again. Not because he needed to hear the words, he already knew what they meant, but because he wanted to see the face of someone who once asked him for a job, now trying to steal his legacy. It wasn't anger that rose in him, not first. It was something else, something colder. Not vengeance, but clarity. Asterisk, asterisk, Sundar didn't call his assistant. Didn't summon legal teams. He did what no executive manual ever suggested. He went for a walk, past the rows of glass-walled offices, through the lobby, out into the night air. No entourage, no plan, just a man thinking with his feet. A habit from long ago when his greatest decisions were made not behind desks, but in motion. Chennai evenings had taught him that. The way a walk through dust and noise can untangle any problem if your heart listens harder than your ears. He walked to the very edge of the company campus, where the light from street lamps grew thin, and sat down on a quiet bench. And for the first time in a long time, he let himself feel it all. The betrayal, the disappointment, the strange grief that comes when someone takes kindness for weakness. He sat like that for a long time, maybe hours. The world didn't rush him. Time, for once, moved respectfully. Asterisk, asterisk, the next morning. Rishi stood in the elevator, straightening his tie, brushing invisible dust from his shoulders. He looked into the mirrored wall and smiled not with joy, but with satisfaction. The internet had already begun debating his role. His name was showing up in headlines. The man who stepped up. The stage was tilting toward him, and he was ready to take it. The elevator doors opened to the executive floor. Rishi stepped out and stopped. Sundar was waiting for him, not behind a desk, not surrounded by advisors, just standing. Arms folded, face steady. Rishi blinked. Morning. We need to talk, Sundar said, motioning toward the small conference room, the one usually used for quiet strategy or hard truths. Inside, the door closed behind them with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slammed gavel. Did you know the second video was recording? Sundar asked. Rishi's eyes narrowed slightly, calculating. Video? Sundar didn't repeat himself. He just watched. Waited. Rishi chuckled under his breath, walked to the window. Come on, you know how the game works. Perception is everything, so is trust. Trust. Rishi laughed now, bitterly. Sundar, we're not living in the age of trust. We're in the age of impressions. Whoever owns the narrative, wins. And what exactly did you win? Sundar asked, voice still calm, but razor-thin. Rishi turned to face him. I won the conversation. People are listening to me now. They're curious. They want to know what I'd do differently. Sundar stepped closer. So you betrayed the very values we stand for. Just to be heard? Rishi's voice dropped. You think being soft and noble will protect you forever? Does industry chews kindness like gum and spits it out the moment it stops tasting useful? There it was. The truth. Raw and naked. And it didn't even sting. Because Sundar had known. Deep down, he'd always known that one day, someone would try to break in, not through the front door, but through the cracks of his decency. But what Rishi didn't understand was this. Softness is not weakness. Patience is not passivity. And silence is not surrender. Asterisk, asterisk, by afternoon, Sundar made a decision not to retaliate, not to punish, but to reveal. He walked into the press room, announced, unplanned, and stepped in front of the cameras. Right there were reporters, social media staff, even employees who had wandered in mid-meeting. Whispers rippled across the room like electricity. I wasn't going to say anything, Sundar began, but I think silence is sometimes mistaken for fear. I want to be clear, I'm not afraid. The room stilled. I believe in leadership that listens. I believe in humility, not for the sake of image, but because no one learns when they're too busy trying to look like they already know everything. And yes, I was denied entry to my own event. Yes, someone took advantage of that moment. But the story you saw is not a scandal. It is a mirror. You could feel the weight in every pause. It reflects something uncomfortable. How we treat people who don't look the part. How quickly we decide someone's worth based on appearance. And how often we reward noise over substance. Someone in the back lowered their phone, stunned. Double quotes. I won't play that game, Sundar said. Because leadership isn't about dominating the room. It's about making sure there's room for others. I've still got work to do. He stepped back, no script in hand, no mic drop needed, just quiet truth laid bare. And as he turned to leave, the press didn't shout. They didn't chase him down. They stood in respectful silence. And somewhere, far from that room, Rishi Menon watched the speech from his phone. And for the first time in days, he didn't smile, asterisk, asterisk, but the story wasn't over. Because power once challenged does not rest quietly, and the people who stood behind Sundar, not all of them would stay there. One of them had secrets, and soon those secrets would become weapons. The betrayal no algorithm could predict by now. The story should have been settling. The headlines had started to cool. The social media rage had shifted, as it always does, toward the next shiny controversy. The world had moved on, but the world inside Sundar Pichai's company had not. In the quiet corners of boxtional emails and hushed coffee shop meetings, something else had begun to take shape. It didn't wear the face of open rebellion. It wasn't loud. It never is. Real betrayal never bursts through the front door. It seeps in through vents and smiles. It began with a document, just one, unsigned, anonymous. It landed on the desk of one of the board's compliance officers late on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. No subject line, no sender. Just a file named truth_in_plain_site.pdf.inside were allegations. Spreadsheets, emails, timelines. Not about Rishi, not about the security incident, about Sundar, or at least that's how it looked. The document suggested that Sundar had known about certain internal layoffs weeks before he claimed that he had quietly signed off on the closure of a subsidiary that impacted hundreds of jobs. And worse, it hinted that he had profited from a private equity decision tied to that closure. It was a clever narrative. It had just enough truth to feel dangerous and just enough fiction to be hard to disprove. Within hours, the document had been forwarded, not just to the board, but to 2 journalists. And suddenly, the storm wasn't online anymore. It was inside. The house, Sundar, was in a product design meeting when the news broke. His assistant, Maina, slipped in mid-presentation and handed him a folded note, something they hadn't done since the early days. Back when phones were discouraged in high-level strategy sessions. He unfolded the paper. Reed didn't blink, just stood up, excused himself politely, and left the room. Outside, Mina was pacing. "It's bad," she said softly. "They're saying you knew about the layoffs last quarter? That you profited from the restructure?" Sundar's response was short. "Where's the data coming from?" "They won't say, but the files. Been sent to 3 newsrooms. One already called. They're running it tonight unless we give a comment." He walked to the window, hands in his pockets. The city lights blurred beyond the glass like ghosts. It wasn't the accusation that hurt. It was how precise the knife had been. Someone close had built this. Someone who knew what buttons to press. He turned slowly. "Call the board. Emergency session." "Irmena, yes?" "Ask legal for the visitor logs from last month." She frowned. "You think someone from the inside?" He nodded. "Not just from the inside. Someone I trusted." ***. 2 hours later, Sundar sat across from 11 board members again. But this time, the air had teeth. The chairwoman was visibly tense. The legal officer was already flipping through a printed version of the file. "We're not accusing you," the chairwoman said carefully, "but these are serious claims." Sundar didn't defend himself. Not yet. Instead, he slid his own folder across the table. "Open that," he said. "You'll find the real timelines, financial statements, board-approved decisions, all logged, all transparent, all dated." He scanned the pages, frowned, whispered the facts were on his side, but the narrative that had already escaped into the wild. Facts moved like turtles. Stories like wolves, and somewhere in the shadows, a wolf had written this story. ***, 3 days passed. The company spun in place. Employees whispered in elevators. Junior staff read Reddit threads instead of emails. Mid-level managers gave each other uncertain glances in town halls. Was it true? Was Sundar losing control? Was the man who once waited in line for his own event now watching the company slip from his hands? And then came the internal audit report. Clear, neutral, final. None of the allegations were true. Every claim was dismantled. Every spreadsheet explained. Every timeline corrected. But the damage had already done its dance. And still, no one knew. Who had sent the file? Until someone did. Mena was the one who found it buried deep in the visitor log metadata. A simple trace. A guest badge that had been issued to a contractor 3 weeks earlier. And a system login that had been used. Once, from a conference room terminal, it had been disguised well, but not perfectly. The trail pointed to someone Sundar had mentored personally, someone he had championed during a difficult merger, someone who quietly and carefully had been drifting into Rishi's orbit. Her name was Alina. Alina worked in strategy, smart, sharp, the kind of mind that turned numbers into stories, graphs into arguments. Sundar had always said she'd lead the future of the company. He just didn't realize she'd try to own it instead. Asterisk, asterisk, when Sundar met with her, it wasn't in a glass tower or a boardroom. He asked to meet at the old campus cafe, the one with bad Wi-Fi and better chai. She was already there when he arrived, dressed in confidence and a hint of regret. "You figured it out," she said, not as a question. "You didn't leave many fingerprints," Sundar replied. "But you left enough," she sighed. "I didn't mean for it to go that far, but you meant it to go somewhere." Alina looked him in the eye. "You've built something beautiful, Sundar, but you built it on silence, on patience. The world doesn't work like that anymore. They want louder leaders, faster decisions, sharper teeth." He stirred his tea slowly. "So you tried to cut me down. I tried to show people you weren't untouchable." Pause. Then Sundar said something that surprised even her. "Thank you." "What?" "For proving that kindness isn't enough anymore. Not on its own. Maybe I've been too quiet for too long. You're not angry?" "No," he said, finishing his tea. "But I'm awake now." He stood to leave. "What happens next?" she asked. He didn't turn around now, he said. "I stopped letting others write my story." Asterisk, asterisk, but as Sundar walked out into the night, a new challenge was already rising, because the world wasn't finished watching, and the final test wasn't betrayal, or lies, or sabotage. It was forgiveness. The quiet revenge of Grassith world loves a rise, obsesses over a fall. But what it never quite knows how to handle is the rebuild. Weeks had passed, not in silence, but in slow recalibration. Sundar Pichai's name had dipped from trending lists. The scandal had evaporated under the weight of disinterest. Social media had turned its attention to the latest startup that promised to reinvent oxygen. Journalists moved on. The wolves got bored. But inside Sundar's company, nothing was the same. Trust, once cracked, doesn't return with apologies. It creeps back, careful and unsure, like a bird landing on a branch that once snapped. The employee smiled again. Yes, but the kind of smile you give someone who once walked out of a burning house with matches in their pocket. Sundar saw it. All of it. He didn't flinch, didn't retreat. Instead, he built quietly. Every morning, he walked the halls. A ghost, not as a shadow, but as a man rebuilding brick by brick. He shook hands. He stopped to listen. He sat with junior coders and asked about their side projects. He wrote personal notes to the cafeteria team. He attended support staff meetings just to listen, not to lead. People started whispering again, but this time, differently. He's still here. He's still him. He didn't fire anyone. It's not even the people who tried to ruin him. And that, more than any memo or press release, began to restore the story. But the hardest meeting was still ahead. One, he kept putting off the one with Rishi Menon. Asterisk, asterisk, the meeting wasn't scheduled. It wasn't formal. Sundar simply showed up at the rooftop garden where he knew Rishi liked to take his coffee. The city stretched below them, breathing, blinking, unaware of the Cold War in its sky. Rishi looked up, surprised, not guilty, not eclipsed. Smug, just surprised. "You came, you didn't think I would?" Sundar asked. Ara gestured to the bench beside him. "You didn't have to." Sundar sat. The silence between them felt like fresh snow, soft, cold, and full of things no one wanted to step on. "You tried to take my place," Sundar said, without venom. "I tried to take a chance," Rishi replied. "There's a difference." And Alina, she believed in something sharper, something faster. Sundar nodded. "And now?" Rishi looked down at his hands. "Now I think, maybe the sharpest blade is the one that doesn't cut. The one that chooses not to." Another pause. "You didn't fire her," Rishi said. "Why?" "Because people aren't defined by their worst decision, even if that decision was against you." "Especially then," Rishi exhaled. Not relief, not regret. Something in between, a strange respect he hadn't expected to feel. "So what now?" he asked. Sundar stood, brushing imaginary dust from his coat. "Now we build something better. Together." you've got the courage to do it honestly. He walked away without waiting for an answer, because forgiveness isn't a handshake. It's an invitation. Months later. The company rolled out a new initiative, one that didn't get splashy headlines, but changed everything internally. Every employee, no matter the level, was given a new badge. Not with their title, not with their department, just their first name. And one question on the back: how do you treat someone you don't recognize? It became more than a conversation starter. It became a culture check. And the security guards, they became part of OMD. Every new hire had to walk in through the front gate like a guest. No special access, no pre-cleared badges, just a chance to feel unseen. Remember how it feels. Jackson, the guard who once blocked Sundar at the gate, was promoted. Not because he changed, but because Sundar did. He rewrote the structure so the people who stand at the doors finally had a voice inside them. *** on Sundar's desk now sits a framed photo. It's not of his family, not of him on stage, not even a newspaper clipping from the scandal. It's a still from the original security footage, him standing outside, the convention center, backpack over one shoulder, being turned away by Jackson. Most people ask why he keeps it. He always says the same thing. Because that was the moment I remembered who I am. Not a title, not a face on a screen, just a man who chose grace when he could have chosen revenge, and in the end, that choice became the most legendary thing of all. The end.